Good afternoon and welcome to Valley Views. I'm your host, Glenn Edison. We're certainly glad to have you today. And as always, you can see our program on BTC Fiber's YouTube page as well as BTC Fiber's Channel 18. And today we have with us Becky Ridley, and she is the director of the Bledsoe County Aware Program. And Becky, it's good to have you. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for asking me.
And many people probably are not aware what the Aware Program is. So why don't we start off by telling people what that is and how it came about?
Okay, well, thank you for having me here today. Project AWARE stands for Advancing Wellness and Resiliency in Education. Now, the Tennessee Project AWARE came about from the Department of Education, and it was set to receive an additional $8.2 million in funding over the next 5 years. But now we're not getting that amount of money, but it equates to about $360,000 a year. We are in the third round of this federal grant, and we are one of three that was chosen for this grant in Tennessee.
Excuse me.
And the other counties were, in this particular round, was Haywood and Scott County. The program actually started in Anderson County under a pilot, and it was successful there, and so the state has decided to branch out.
And do they offer, I know it was grant funded.
Yes.
So do they offer it just to so many, or so many awards offered each year and then you have to apply? Is that how that works?
They did have to apply for it, and that is true. Only so many people were granted that. And Michelle Range is actually the person that applied for the grant. She couldn't be here today, but she talked about how competitive it was and that we're very fortunate to get that. And I'll talk a little bit more in a few minutes. We'll get into what some of the criteria was to be able to receive that grant. The goals of the AWARE program are to increase the community-wide mental health awareness, basically to reduce the stigma. So it's something that we've needed for a long time, and that the student ratio for guidance counselors to student is way above what the BEP funding would pay. And so this gives us additional support staff to be able to go in and provide counseling services for students, to be able to make inroads into pieces through like character education, social emotional wellness pieces, and just be able to reduce the stigma of what mental wellness is. To have people open up and really be able just to talk about what the conflicts are that they have in school, or just have somebody to lead and guide them by the side.
Well, mental, excuse me, mental awareness is something that a lot of times goes unnoticed because a lot of people do not want to have that, as you said, the stigma that they're mentally ill or there's something mentally wrong. And at times it might be just something that's physically wrong with that person, and maybe some medication might help, but also the counseling, because you never know what triggers someone. Someone might be enter the school year fine, and then something traumatic happened during the school year, and that triggers something.
Well, and that's interesting that you introduce it in that way, because ACEs is what this really concentrates on, and some people may not understand what ACEs are. So ACEs are adverse childhood experiences, and everybody has had some experience like that. But the more ACEs that you have in your life, well, the cards can be stacked against you. Something like a trauma is what you mentioned. A trauma could be something like a car wreck. A trauma could be a terminal illness that somebody has. A trauma for a child could be divorce.
Right.
And so when people hear the word mental, anything to do with mental, there is a stigma, as you said. So we don't really use the word mental illness. We talk about mental wellness. We want to teach students and faculty what is mental wellness and what does that look like. And so on the spectrum of that, the teachers, they see the whole landscape of the student.
Right.
So they're best to see, really I like to say, the pulse of the student, because they can see those changes. And so it could just be that maybe the child is sleeping more often, or they're showing signs and symptoms of anxiety. So it's so that they can talk to their teacher about that, and then they have somebody else that they can talk to in confidence about these things. So the stigma is people don't want to talk about it because they say, oh, I don't want to be labeled. So this reduces the stigmatism of that.
Well, I know, as you mentioned, a lot of people, they go around, they don't want to be stigmatized, thinking that they're crazy. You know, that's how we grew up. Everybody thought, well, you're crazy, you're mentally ill. But that's not always the case. I mean, it could be something simple that's just triggering your system. You know, your nerves or something that causes you to do something that wouldn't normally do, and that hurts. And like you said, mentioned the trauma. Now there's more families that have to deal with drugs and alcohol, divorces, and then there's the deaths, and you know, as we mentioned, so a lot of that goes on that a lot of times we're not aware of sometimes because the children don't necessarily come out and tell you always.
That's true. And so we don't really go to the spectrum of things like, you know, on the end of the mental illness that you're talking about, that would be clinical therapy. That's not what we're here for, okay? But we're here to catch more of the social emotional aspect of that,
Okay.
to help kids with character education, to make good decisions. We're not therapists, okay, but we can, the way I like to say this is we were able to provide the tools that students would need. There's different, under this grant there is like a tier 1, a tier 2, and a tier 3 concept. And so in Tennessee we use that multiple tiered system to be able to assess the needs of students. So the first entrance into that would be the groundwork, where it's climate pieces, and I like to use it as overarching education. So we're talking about topics such as anti-bullying. Okay, what does bullying look like? You know, how to stand up for yourself. Because one of the most important things is that a student feels safe in school and that they are respected.
Right.
And we also do some overarching pieces about being positive, you know, being resilient. I mentioned the word earlier that AWARE stands for Advancing Wellness. So wellness is, you know, the whole child concept. It's your physical aspect of how you feel, your exercise piece that our physical education teachers put in there, our wellness classes. There's a broad range of topics that are under that scope. But then when we look at the whole child concept, what you eat, and our school system does an excellent job of taking care of the whole child, from the feeding programs that we have to our nurses in our school. All of these people are essential stakeholders in helping us be able to drive this program home. But that resiliency piece is that bounce back factor. So when you think of resiliency, you think about holding a ball in your hand, bounce that ball here and it bounce back up. Well, some of us are more resilient than others. And so our program is helping kids to be able to talk about that, to help the coping mechanisms, and then build a program of linking them to the resources that best fit their needs in their life. Because every student is different. You're different than me, and I'm different than you, and I like to use it as like thumbprint, that everybody has a different thumbprint.
Right.
So teaching kids that, you know, I'm okay, you're okay, that was sort of an old school thing, but today we talk about you are somebody, and so we use this phrase, you are thumbody. Now I didn't get that, I stole that from somebody else, but that's because you are unique, you are different, and it's okay to talk about the things that are going on in your life that could be causing you stress. COVID-19 came in and it caused a lot of stress.
Yes, it sure did.
And so that resiliency factor, students were maybe here, you know, if we're looking at a seesaw effect, okay, so the more positive things that you have in your life, the stronger your self-esteem is going to be, the more resilient you can be. But then you get set back. And I think it happened to all of us.
Right.
And there was a documentary that I saw that was called Languishing. And that was just about how people were dealing with not having social contact anymore.
Right.
And just the mask and all the things that just brought a new set of fears to people, the awareness of that. And so this program gives students an opportunity to have the resources, and that we can connect them. You mentioned some of the more traumatic things early on, and so we do have programs in place that we can link them to the Tier 3 services. And when we talk about Tier 3, we have a partnership with Centerstone, and so the Tier 3 would be for students that might be contemplating stress that, well, a lot of people don't want to say this word, suicide, okay? And so I'm just going to have to say it. And so they need long-term therapy.
Right.
And so those are things that we outsource. Under this program, no one is denied. So if a student does not have insurance, we'll help them find a way to get services. All students are going to be able to be accommodated in that. But the grant, well, I forgot to mention that it came from the federal government, and the federal government program, the umbrella of that was the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. So I need to make sure and give them credit for that.
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Well, did part of that come out of, it may be separate from, but I know during the COVID, there was a lot of programs that were funded, for various reasons, but was this something separate from all that?
I'm not really sure. I just know that it was meant to target the fact that in rural area counties where you don't have enough guidance counselors, or you don't have enough licensed professionals to be able to meet the needs of all the students.
Right.
And the reason we were picked was, now this was criteria came from Michelle, that we're a rural area with high concentrations of child poverty, child abuse, and neglect. Also, chronic absenteeism is something that we're addressing. Juvenile court referrals. And then the last criteria was high relative prevalence of youth mental health disorders. And so those were the 4 criteria that helped us be able to sustain this grant.
Yeah, and that's something, like you said earlier, you don't like to talk about those things because some people have this thing that it's a bad thing, so you don't want to talk about it. But it really needs to be talked about so the help, as you said, can be provided. Now, can you take referrals like from other teachers, parents, or people that maybe they're around a student that maybe you're not around as much? Maybe you've only seen them once or twice, and they say, "Hey, I see a change in this person. Maybe something's going on." And maybe they're not aware, but they see changes. Can you take referrals, or how does this work?
Well, that's a great question. We're talking about the referral process. The referral process comes internally, and that comes from the teachers, as we talked about. We've built a portal where it's really just a Google Classroom document, and the teachers can go in and they can refer a student. And there's a wide variety of things they could refer them for. So it could be anxiety, it could be the peer conflict that we talked about, it could just be chronic absenteeism, it could be that the teacher knows that they've experienced a death in their family. It could be that somebody's in their family, or maybe the child's been diagnosed with some sort of illness. So there's a wide array of things. It could just be that they need to just have a support system of somebody to talk to. Okay, it could be academic based. And so to answer your question, yes, we have a referral system, and then we look at that referral and we decide where it needs to go. Okay, so we have some partnerships as well, and under the grant we were required to have a partnership with someone that we could outsource if a student needed long-term counseling, because that has to come from a therapist.
Right.
Okay? But then what we call Tier 2 would be ongoing conversations, say like weekly, if they needed that type of intervention. And so we have a partnership with Volunteer Behavioral, and we have a liaison in our building. And our hub is located here at the middle school. We've been very fortunate to have principals that are willing to work with us in all the schools. They have welcomed our staff. We have 3 support specialists, and right now we have one that's full-time at the high school. We have a staff person here at the middle school, and then we have another support specialist that covers the 2 mountain schools. So it's on an as-needed basis. And you talked about the referral system, and that's what drives, the data drives the system. So we look at the data weekly, we look at the referrals, and then we go where we're best needed. And a lot of that is not just talking to individuals on consultations. It's like I talked about the overarching education piece. That's the tier 1 climate pieces where we go in and we teach classes on like anti-vaping. And I'll go back to talk about the data again. That drives what we build our small group consultations on. So if it's pure conflict, there's sometimes a misconception about what bullying is, and that is when children are younger, they might think that this is an act as bullying when really it's just pure conflict. It's just a matter of being able to talk to somebody and say, hey, I don't like you doing this, or saying this. And so we try to resolve those conflicts that way, person to person. Just teaching people how to stand up for yourself, but also just how to have a conversation with another person and get along in the world.
Because I know today, it seems like there's more people that get offended today at the least little thing just because they differ in opinion or something. And do you see a lot of that where the people get offended easily?
Well, that's that resilience factor that we're talking about. We're talking about just a respect, and I think that's where the character education classes come in. That we have adopted character counts, which is the 6 pillars of respect, and each week here at the middle, or each month here at the middle school, they pick one of those pillars to concentrate on, whether it's kindness week or kindness month, excuse me. This month is citizenship. It's taking care of your environment, taking care of your school, knowing that every person in this school is essential to the school, from the custodian all the way to the principal, just respecting one another. So it's working on those types of relationships.
Well, good. It sounds like this program will make all the students better citizens if they stick to the program.
Well, we hope. We hope. Everybody can benefit from being just kind to one another and learning how to resolve conflicts.
Well, and it's good that, like I said, this is aimed at rural communities, but it was good that here in Bledsoe County, I mean, being a small rural county, that you're able to get that. That's a great thing.
It is. It's going to make really the aim of the grant is to sustain it past the 5 years. But what we really want to do is make inroads into helping people understand what mental wellness looks like. Second is to reduce that stigma. And the goal is to have all 5 schools become trauma-informed schools. So when you look at trauma and you say, what does trauma really mean, and what does it mean to be informed of that? We're looking at the signs and the symptoms of mental wellness and when that is declining. And so there are oftentimes there could be, say, a referral to the office for discipline, but there might be a better way to handle that. Now, I'm not talking negative about administrators. They have to sit down and they have to conduct a discipline when that's necessary. But what our program does is take that and say to this student, we want you to find a way not to repeat this behavior. I equate it to being kind of like a GPS system. We can all get off track, but we find a way to navigate back on to the right path, and that we don't make the same mistakes. And so then we build the small groups to help them do that, or we, as I said earlier, we develop a program to fit the individual need of that student. So that is the long-term goal, is to sustain the program and to infiltrate into our community through partnerships. I don't know if you've heard of Youth Mental Health First Aid.
No, I have not.
And that in itself teaches people how to just have conversations, how to look for signs and symptoms, whether it's your neighbor, that might be somebody that is declining, that maybe you notice doesn't come outside anymore. And so just a way to start a conversation of how can you help that person, and just recognizing maybe a decline in their mental wellness.
Kind of like we as adults would do checkups on those that are shut in,
Yes,
just to make sure they're doing okay.
that's it. You know, people grieve the way they grieve. If something happens and you lose a loved one, then that in itself is a very stressful event. And some people are more inclined to talk, and
Mhm.
others don't. They think
Right.
they can handle it themselves, and so when you're trying to handle it yourself, that in itself can cause more stress.
Sure it can. And then by doing that, if you try to handle it yourself, it also causes physical problems as well.
It
You know,
can.
and wear
Certainly
down
can.
your own body. And that's not good.
That's true. That's true.
And now, this sounds like a program like that you could have used here at the middle school a few years ago when I believe it was your principal that was killed when she was at a doctor's visit a few years ago. You know, and that was, I'm sure that was a tremendous, you know, trauma for this school. And, you know.
Well, and it was for the community because she was well known, but that would be a service that could have been provided as far as the grief piece. That's correct. Yes.
Because you never know from day to day what might happen, because everybody doesn't think short term. They think long term. You know, they don't think about this is going to happen. They just think about everything's going on just like normal, and they don't think. Of course, none of us do. We don't think about death. We don't think about things that are going to happen or could happen. We just go on about our business, and then things happen, and it throws a loop in our plans.
It's true.
Now, is this program open? You mentioned is it start with preschool or kindergarten, or is it first grade? How does it?
We've always had guidance counselors in our schools, so our guidance counselors, they are trained to be able to accommodate a wider range of needs for students. But the support specialists are just, we call them student support specialists because that's what they're in place to do, is to help. The gatekeepers of the program would be your guidance counselors, and then they will look at the referrals, and then they'll outsource that to where it needs to be within this program. When we talk about the tiers, that's the overarching education pieces, as I've already spoke to, so it touches basically everybody in the whole school. It's just information, okay? And then tier 2 would be, as we talked about, here at the middle school, we have the volunteer behavioral group that we have a partnership with, and they can build the small group education pieces. And then, like we talked about earlier, the tier 3 would be something that you outsource, okay? So I'm not sure if that answered your question
No, that
or
did.
not.
I was going to ask also, does the program allow, maybe it doesn't because of the type of program it is, but does it allow for you to have like student groups that can also talk to students who might be going through something that does allow you to do that?
That's something that we're going to be building, and that's an ambassador program. And right now, that's targeted more for the high school. But we give students opportunities to make a difference in the school through character education pieces.
Well, I know a lot of times when I taught middle school, I used to, if someone was not understanding something, I'd look at somebody and say, "Will you tell them what I was trying to say?"
Like a mentoring program. Yes.
Yeah. And
Okay.
you know, because a lot of times a student can really just tell it a lot easier, because what we're thinking and what comes out of our mouth sometimes is not always the same thing.
Well, and I think that's more powerful when it comes from one of your peers. And one of the programs that we're trying to implement in all the schools would be a positive behavior program. And that at the middle school, the teachers are giving tickets to the students who portray the characteristics under those 6 pillars. And we talked about picking a different theme each month. So then they're put into a drawing, and then we partner with people in the community to give away prizes. It can be things like
that's nice.
Taco Bell card, and the prizes will get bigger as we go through the year. And of course, we're also motivating them to attend school and to do well on their TCAP test and those things. Now you might say, why aren't you mentioning more about the elementary schools? The teachers there have their own things that they do within their classroom because they're with the same teacher. So it's a little different on the middle school level. And and so every school climate's different, so the inroads that we're trying to make in this first year really just depend on the climate of the school and what services are already in place, and what we can do to enrich those services. So at the high school, we're fortunate to have what's called communities and schools, and we have a licensed person there. Now, they're not under the AWARE grant, but it's part of a grant from the state of Tennessee, and so counseling can be done in that aspect as well. So we are looking to, you always want to add to your staff if you can, but we've only been in the school since January. So,
really?
It was some of the programs I was hired in November, but then I continued on into the classroom because I was didn't want to leave the classroom and them have to have like a substitute teacher come in. So we got our staff in place in January, and we met the goal of having support staff in the schools. They wanted us to do that by January 31st, but we hit the road running. We had to do that by January 20th. So I'm very proud of the support staff that we have. I have nothing but compliments to say about the administrators at all the schools who welcomed us, and of course like I said, the gatekeeper of this program would be your guidance counselors, and they do so much more than you could ever imagine, and just helping the needs of the whole child needs of each and every student in the building.
Right, a lot of times they see the guidance counselors around test time handing out all the tests and coordinating all that, and they don't see what the guidance counselor actually does behind the scenes a lot on most days.
That's true. So it's building that character. It's the social emotional learning pieces, and just from like we talked about, we may have a child that needs clothing. They need some extra food, and we have partnership with First Southern through their clothes closet and their food pantry, and so the communities and schools partnered with them, and we make sure that students have weekend food packs that are put on the bus.
That's good.
We do that on Thursdays here, but I believe at the high school they do that on Fridays, and we do it in a way that doesn't stigmatize the student. So elementaries, they put it in their backpack, but here at the school, at the middle school, we put it on the bus, and at the high school, I'm not sure. I think the kids it's a grab and go over there.
Right.
So we have big ideas, but in the first year we're just trying to kind of slow this down. The plan for this summer is a training of the trainer model, where we'll start our building Stronger Brains training, and this will be the very first phase of all 5 schools becoming trauma-informed schools, so they can recognize the signs and symptoms of what might be something that needs to be addressed in a student that's declining. Some of the things that you talked about already. Let's see if there's anything else.
Well, that's a good thing, because I know when I taught school, a lot of times I was in my classroom and I was concentrating on trying to do my material, and a lot of times someone said, "Well, hey, have you heard about this?" And I said, "No, I'm not aware of what's going on." So sometimes you do have teachers that are so focused and rightfully so on their subject and trying to do everything that they're not catching, what's going on the outside with students sometimes. And so that's going to be good that all your faculty can be trained in this and be aware.
Yeah, and because every student deserves somebody that can be a champion for them and to be able to truly listen to them. And so the program provides a confidential place for students to be able to talk about what their needs are, but also, like you said, it helps teachers be able to recognize so they know if they need to make that referral or not. Next year, we will have an outside referral. We built our web page, and it should be up and running sometime this week, just to put the advertisement out there, or a marketing piece of what AWARE is. But by next year, there'll be an outside referral pathway so that it'll be tied to a link. And so a parent could actually go in on the portal and refer their child, or it could be a student that refers another student, because you think about it, students talk to each other.
Right.
And so we want to encourage students, hey, if your friend is showing signs and symptoms of declining, or or of self-harm, or just grieving, or they're aware of something that we are not aware of, like you said,
right.
they can refer them to get that extra piece of counseling that they may need. And then, like I think I already said this, students can refer themselves even, and that keeps it confidential. And all of our services, we follow the HIPAA laws, so that we won't disclose any names of anybody. We don't talk about, we don't have conversations about an individual student. It all stays in-house.
Right.
So, and then if the counseling is ongoing, then there's parental consent for that. But
right.
the things that we do in Tier 1 that are overarching, just conversations, a lot of it's just putting out fires. It's just students need a little extra, I like to say a little extra love, okay? Just somebody to say, hey, I need to talk about what's going on, and I need somebody to listen to me.
Right.
And it stay confidential.
Right. Well, sometimes students need someone other than their parents or their friends, someone that it's kind of doesn't have a dog in the fight, so to speak, just sit down and say, well, here's how you should do that.
Yes, because it's just like sometimes a bias, somebody that's non-biased. And of course, we're not trying to, take the place of the parent or the caregiver, or in any way. We're just adding that extra layer of support that students would need. And I think too, when students transfer from another system,
right.
That's a big thing.
Yes, it is.
Because they don't know anybody, and it just gives them somebody to introduce them to help them make relationships or connect with other people.
Well, I know speaking of that, there's a lot of people moving in from out of state into the valley, and a lot of families. So that could be bringing in more students that maybe they're used to a big city situation. They come here and they go, oh man, this is not home,
Well,
and
anytime you're moving from one place to another, that's a transition in itself, and it's a change is hard, and it's the unknown. So just helping them have somebody to acclimate to that new environment.
Right, and a lot of times they do have trouble, as you mentioned, acclimating, and so they need someone to come in and say, hey, it's all right, here's somebody you can talk to.
Yes.
That'll help you along. And you mentioned the parents referring. I know as long as I can remember, there's always been some parents that just could not control maybe their children, and not that they didn't try, they just, the parents needed help, and so this would be a way that parents could actually seek out some help as well.
That's right, and so that referral pathway will enable them to do that. But of course now they can still do it even though there's not an outside referral pathway. They can still call the school and they can request that their child have access to counseling services. And if it is the Tier 2, like I said, if it's a weekly, then we'll get the parent consent before we continue on with that.
Well, and also this type of program will also help students keep out of the legal system.
Well, we hope.
Yeah.
That's what we hope. We can't make any promises, but I'm glad you mentioned that, because we are not punitive. And when I say punitive, we don't deal out punishment.
Right.
Okay? And so this program is meant to segue away from the judicial system, to catch students early on,
right.
to help them understand that if it's a behavior that's not acceptable, how to correct that behavior before it leads down that road. So I mentioned earlier in-school suspension. So if a student is dealt a punishment that is deserved, okay,
Right.
then that we're not part of that punishment, but we're part of building a plan to help them not make the same mistake again.
Right.
Because when they're in school suspension, they're losing quality time in the classroom.
Yes.
And usually if a child, or a student, I don't have to say child, but goes down that path to where they needed to be in that environment, there's a root of a problem. It's coming from somewhere. So we're trying to help discover what caused that behavior.
Right.
And build a plan so that they don't go back to that same behavior.
Right.
So it's a restorative practice. So we do what's called check in and check out, because when a student has to go for discipline, you want to check in on them, and you want to make sure that they're thriving in that environment as well. And then when they come back into the regular classroom, that they're not carrying that stigma with them.
Right.
So it's not a label that you say, well, because I, had this behavior, that this defines me, that this is how I'm always going to be.
Right. Right.
So it might be, it could be that there was a root of anxiety. It could have been aggression. There's a lot of layers of things that I can get into, but.
Well, and that also helps, because I know I've known students who never got help, and they just continued on down that path, because they just, or a lot of times they didn't have someone to say, hey, let's think about what you're doing, actually sit down and just talk to them.
Right.
And they didn't, because they didn't have that, they didn't have it at home, they didn't have it in the school setting, they just didn't have anything, and so that they turned out to be a worst case scenario. And this is a program that can stop those worst case scenarios.
Well, we hope. We don't know that. I'm not going to hold out a promise that we can stop all of it, but it goes back to the multi-tiered support systems. So the more support that you have for a student, and whatever the problem is, then we're hoping we can at least reduce the chances of that happening. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It does. Well, it sounds like this program has really got a lot to offer, and it's really going well in the few short months y'all started.
Well, we're excited. We have more things to build on, but we hit the ground running pretty quick.
Now, you said it's a 5-year program, right?
It has been funded for 3, but everyone has said that it should be, that the money's there for 5 years. But we got the money up front for 3, so I still say 5. But our goal is to sustain it longer than the 5 years. And we can do that by, there are certain benchmarks that we have to meet, but.
And I'm sure, because I've met many of the people here in the community, and I'm sure there's people in this community that want to see a program like this survive and go strong. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of support to help, if you needed things or needed maybe just someone to come in and talk, or I don't know if your program would allow that, but you can always reach out for outside sources, and I'm sure there's plenty of people here in Pikeville and Bledsoe County that would be willing to help in any way they could.
Well, and I agree, we're blessed in Bledsoe County that people, they're all hands on deck, and so we're building some things in the community now coming up that I'd like to talk about, and we just finished the Teen Life Maze, which Michelle's program, along with the Tennessee Department of Health, put that on, and that was for 7th and 8th and 9th and 10th graders got to go through the Teen Maze, which teaches them about real life scenarios. So that was amazing, and our staff ended up doing what we call exit interviews, so that if a situation, if they drew a card where maybe, that it gave them a scenario that they ended up dying pretty early in life, or these traumas, if you will, we were there to support them in that. But so that was an amazing event, and then we have April the 7th at the high school coming up, a career health fair, which I think will be good for students to start thinking about their future, and then so these are partnerships is what I'm trying to say. And then we have partnered with the Pikeville Chamber of Commerce to host a mental health awareness walk on May 7th.
Oh.
Well, the chamber is having what they call the summer nights, and their first cruise-in is on May the 7th, so the Mayor Cable was very gracious in saying that we could align with them and the chamber and do our mental health awareness walk, because May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And so that's where our big surge is. We're really pushing that out. And then our staff will be trained. We've already been trained in the adult and youth mental health first aid program, and we'll be being retrained by the state, and then our job will be to go into the schools and train all the teachers for that awareness piece. And I think that's the second year in the program, but this summer we'll be training the staff on what's called Building Stronger Brains, and that's that trauma-informed school. And Pop Elementary is already a trauma-informed school. But that's kind of a long answer, but no program can survive without partnerships.
Right.
And so we start with our inroads into the school, and then the more people in your community that are aware about what mental wellness is and what does it mean to be resilient, the more potential you have to help a multitude of people. And that's what we want to do. We want to be able to bring reduce the stigmatism in Bledsoe County. Across the state of Tennessee, that people can ask for help and there's no shame in it. And that, when you look at mental wellness, you started off talking about the spectrum as well, but here you mentioned some that would be severe. But we're talking about every single person has some kind of stress.
Sure,
there's good stress and there's bad stress. But if you hold on to that stress, then it can do, as you already alluded to, it can hurt you physically. It can shut you down. And so we want to teach people how to keep moving through that, moving through it, but to be able to ask for help, and the help is there.
Well, good. And I think you've already alluded to it since your walk or run. I was going to ask you if you participated in local events where you set up a table or booth where you handed out information just for the program.
Well, we've been doing that at parent-teacher conferencing. We have started with faculty meetings, and of course the broader piece would be to infiltrate into the community. So we're building that right now. Any place that we could go and speak and talk, and that will be one of our goals and our objectives.
Well, good, because I know in talking to your husband as well as the mayor, there's a lot of events coming up, pretty soon actually, throughout the Bledsoe County and Pikeville area, and there's events planned, so that there's plenty of things out there for you're going to bring in people.
Well, when we find out about them, if they invite us, we will be there.
Well, that's great. Well, is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to talk about?
I don't think so. I think you asked me a wide array of questions.
Well, if someone was interested in the program and wanted to know more, how would they contact you?
Well, they could they could just call the middle school, and they could ask for any of our support staff. They could just ask for the Aware Program Director, okay? Or they could email me at ridleyb@bledsoecountyschools.org.
Oh, okay.
Okay. We have the phone line in here. I don't have the phone number memorized. I'm sorry.
Well, that's all right.
They can just call the main line and they'll patch us through.
Well, that's good. Well, it's certainly been a good time today with you, and this program sounds like it's going to do a lot of great things, and I'm looking forward to hearing the success of the program. And I know y'all will do a lot. And so, folks, remember the AWARE program here in Bledsoe County, and be a part of it. And if you need information, contact Miss Ridley here at the middle school. And again, you can see this interview on BTC Fiber's YouTube page as well as BTC Fiber's Channel 18. And until next time, have a great day.
Hey everybody, this is Glenn Edison from Valley Views. We appreciate you watching our shows, and we would like for you to like, share, and follow us on Facebook, as well as like and subscribe to our YouTube page.
Brought to you by Bledsoe Telephone Cooperative, your full-service telecommunications provider right here in the Sequatchie Valley.